Welcome back, you guys. We are doing my long-awaited eyeshadow palette collection. So this is my very first eyeshadow palette collection, so I hope you guys enjoy it. We're going to get diving right into it. I like to do mine typically by brand. That is how I set up most of my palettes. So we're going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to go ahead and put markers down below. If there's a specific collection that you're wanting to look at, I'll go ahead and put it all the information down below so you guys can skim through it or whatever it is that you guys want to see. I also do want to disclaim that I am suffering a little bit from a cold. I kind of have a plugged nose right now, so if you guys hear me sniffling throughout this video, I apologize. So let's go ahead and get diving into it. So the very first palette I have is the Urban Decay Naked Petite Heat palette. I do like this palette. I find myself reaching more for it during the summertime. I also do have the Naked Basics palette that I really only gravitate towards when I am traveling because, once again, it is small, it's compact, and it's really easy to work with. I do have the Urban Decay and Kristen Leanne palette. This here is called the Daydream Eyeshadow Palette. The packaging on her collection came out absolutely beautiful. Even the inside, the detailing in it, I thought was really pretty. This is comprised of 5 all matte shadows. I don't know if you can still get her collection anymore. Of her entire collection, there are a few items in her collection that I fell in love with. Her lipstick is really great. Her highlighter is really great, and this is just an easy all matte eyeshadow palette. I do have the Urban Decay Back Talk palette. When you open it, it'll have one side for the face and one side for the eyeshadow. The mirror on the middle will actually pop out, which I think is really great. Although you'll notice that there's only 3 eyeshadows that are matte in this palette. Sticking along with those rosy tone colors, we do have the Naked Cherry palette. This is a newer palette of mine. I've really been enjoying it. I find the colors to be really nice. The formula is right along there with the other Naked formulas, so this is a really, really pretty palette to have. I have the Naked and Urban Decay original formula. The next one I have is the Naked 2 palette. This is one of my first palettes that I ever purchased, so it might be a little bit old, but I still find myself diving for it quite often. This here is the Naked Heat palette. I think if you have this palette, I don't think you necessarily need to have the little tiny one, the Petite Heat. I do find myself recommending this palette to a lot of people because I feel like a lot of people really enjoy those orange tone colors. This is a really great palette to start out with. This here is the Urban Decay Born to Run palette. This is by far my favorite palette that Urban Decay has came out with to date. I feel like the formula in here is just so much more different than the other palettes that they've come out with in the past, and the colors are great in here. There's so many versatile looks that you can do. You can do a really nice, easy look, a really warm tone look. You can even make it a very sultry look. You can use just mattes, you can use just metallics, just shimmers. There's just so many possibilities with this palette. So the newest palette that they have to their collection is the Naked Reloaded palette. As of right now, I have not played with this, but once this video airs, I do believe that I have done my review, which I will have linked above in the iCard, or you guys can look down in the description box. This here is the Urban Decay and Gwen Stefani palette. I really like the colors in here. There are a really good variation between mattes and shimmers, and all around I just really enjoyed this collection. We also do have the Urban Decay and Kristen Leanne palette. This isn't a palette that I would go to on its own, but I do dive into this palette when I need more punches of color, and that's why I really enjoy it. I do have a few of the Urban Decay Vice palettes. This one here is Vice number 2. I've had this one for a really long time. I think it's cute. I don't dive into it as much as I used to, but it still has some really good colors in here. It's more dark, sultry colors. So this here is another Urban Decay palette that came around during Christmas. I really enjoyed that they put the colorful palettes on one side and then they put the neutrals on the other side. My last Urban Decay palette I have is the Urban Decay Electric palette. I waited quite a bit of time to get this palette. I did wait until it was on sale, and then I decided to pick it up to do more colorful looks. So moving into the Juvia's Place palettes, I only have 2 palettes. The very first one I have is the Warrior by Juvia's Place, and this one I actually just recently talked about. I just picked this one up. And then the other palette I have is the Nubian 2 palette. Played with it just a few times, but I still have liked the formula on it. I do like the Juvia's Place palettes. I do have one palette from Charlotte Tilbury, and this is set up into 4 quads. You have the Day palette, the Desk palette, the Date palette, and the Disco Eye palette. Now, I do have one palette from this company. This is by Gade Cosmetics. It's called the Glam Hour palette. I've only played with this once, and I've barely really touched it, so I can't really say a whole lot about it. I've only had it for about a month now, so I still need to play around with it, but it's got some really pretty colors in it. I really do enjoy this color. I thought that color was kind of cool and different. It's a pressed glitter, which I thought was really pretty. This here is the Friendcation palette with Desi and Katie. I actually just got this last week. I was at Ulta the other day and I finally decided to dive into it. So I have not played with it yet. It is a very, very new palette in my collection. I'm very excited to try it out. So moving into the Too Faced brand, I do have the Gingerbread Spice eyeshadow palette. I did do a full-on review on this palette. While I do find this palette to be okay, I wouldn't necessarily say it was my favorite palette from their collection. This here is the Too Faced Chocolate Bar palette. I've had this palette for a very, very long time and I still find the colors to work really well. I do enjoy this palette so much. Next one I have is the Too Faced Chocolate Bonbons palette. This palette is really cute. I think if you are looking into the chocolate bar collection, this would be one to consider. The one thing I do love about the chocolate bar palettes is that they typically give you two really big size shades like this Divinity and the Satin Sheets. I like when they do that because I do find myself using those colors a lot, so I do enjoy the fact that they give you those big extra large pan sizes of that. This one here is the Too Faced Christmas collection that they came out with this past year. I have not dove into it, but it does have a blush palette in it. It has these shades right here, which I thought were really pretty sultry shades. And then the last one I have here is more warm tone shades. Unfortunately, I still have not played around with this, but I definitely plan to. I also do have the Too Faced Stardust palette. This was the collaboration with Too Faced and Vegas Nay. By far, one of my favorite palettes I've ever had. Know a lot of people still have this one in their collection. I think that the formula was really great on this palette. I think the color choices were amazing and all around a really, really great palette to have. This here is the Power of Makeup palette. This is the controversial one with Too Faced and Nikkie Tutorials. Mainly, I use this palette more for the Chocolate Soleil because I'm out of mine in the full-size pan, so I've been diving into it for that reason. This here is the Natural Eyes palette. This one here is a very neutral palette, just your nice and natural everyday brown tone shades. This here is the Too Faced White Peach palette. I dive into this palette. I've created a few looks, especially on Instagram, using like Peach Passion and the Sweet Fig. But I really enjoy this palette. I think it's a really cute palette. Again, just a really nice all over palette. So I really enjoy it. The newest one to my collection, and I believe the last one in here from the Too Faced line, is the Pretty Rich palette. This is a stunning palette. Even just the packaging itself is so classy and so pretty. And I know you guys see it always sitting in my background. So I just wanted to mention that to you guys because I know a lot of you guys have been asking me to do a look using this. I promise it's coming. Now moving into Tarte, the very first one I have and the newest in my collection is the Rainforest of the Sea palette. This is volume number 3. I just recently got it, so I haven't been able to figure out exactly what I like and don't like on this palette, but this is what it looks like. I have two of the Tartelette palettes in my collection. The very first one I have is the Tartelette palette, which is their original, by far my favorite palette ever from the Tarte collection, and probably in my top 10 palettes of all time. I love everything about this palette. It is an entirely matte palette. I've recommended this palette as a gift for a lot of people, and every person that's purchased it has always told me that they absolutely love this palette. And then the last Tartelette palette I have is the Tartelette in Bloom. And this here is more for those who enjoy more warmer tones. This palette here comes from one of their holiday collections. I don't remember exactly which one it was. I ended up keeping this one. I think I split some of it up with my mom. I don't really use it for the eyeshadows very much. I use it more for the bronzer and the blush. Here is another one of their eyeshadow palettes that was a Christmas collection. From purchasing quite a few of these throughout the past couple of years, I've learned that if I buy the collection now, I really am purchasing it more for the blush and bronzer collection more than the eyeshadows, because I just feel like the eyeshadows in here just aren't very up to par with their normal formulas. I feel like they kind of cheap out on them. Yes, I do use some of these shades, but it isn't anything that I care for. So yeah, that's exactly why I still have it more for this part of the palette. So this here is the last one of their collection that I have. I will say that I purchased this one because it had more cool tone colors. I do have one MAC palette like this. I can't believe I only have one, to be honest with you guys. This here is their Burgundy Quad, or their Burgundy 9 Shadow set. And then the next one I have is the Laura Lee Party Animal palette. This one here I did get in a boxy charm, more of your vibrant colors, but yeah. So we're going to move into ColourPop. I do have the ColourPop and Amanda Steele Weekend Warrior palette. This one I did get through Ipsy. Works really good. I like the ColourPop pressed powders way more than I liked their shock they're single pots. I'm not a fan of those. Another new one to my collection is the It's My Pleasure palette, and I absolutely love this palette. I've only had this for a few weeks now, you guys, but I can tell you, if you love purples and like pink tone colors, I think you would really love this palette. The other palette I have, which I may butcher, but it's called the Double Entendre palette, and this here is a very neutral warm tone palette. We'll dive into a NARS really quickly because I only have 2 palettes. This first one is the Skin Deep palette, and I just recently did a look. I just got this palette. I've only played with it a handful of times, but I can already tell you I absolutely love this palette. It's amazing. And then this here is the Ignited palette. I really loved the packaging, so that's why I kept it. This here I have not played with. I just recently got this palette as well. It's got more of those foiled shadows to it, so you only get 3 matte shades on the far left, and then the rest of them have some sort of metallic or foil finish to them. I do have 1 Jouer palette. This here is the Essential Matte and Shimmer palette. In this palette, you get 8 mattes and you get 4 shimmers, so you do get a nice variation of colors. A really good palette. I do like the formula in it. This is my only Jouer palette, but I will say that I've been so impressed with this palette so far. This here is the LA Girl Reverie palette. I just recently spoke about this. I picked this up in my Ulta haul, and then we just did an update on my Ulta haul, and I mentioned to you guys I still haven't played with this one yet, but when I purchased this during Christmas, I just thought the colors looked really nice. I still have to play with it, so I do have the Huda Beauty Rose Gold palette. This is her very first one. It's the Textured Rose Gold. By far, if I have to pick anything about this palette that I don't like, it is the very top row. I cannot get these shadows to work well for me at all. I don't like the way that the formula is on them, so I strictly only stick with their matte formulas. Then I also have the Desert Dusk palette, and this one here I do find myself playing with way more than the other one. I do love the formula of the matte shadows. They're really great. I prefer this one more so over the original one that I have. So here is the last one I have, which is the Huda Beauty Emerald palette. And I did do a look using this palette as well. Again, I really like it. I wanted to pick out something that I knew I loved and something that I wanted to play around with a little bit more and that I didn't have a lot of colors of. And so I picked the green one and I fell in love with it. So we have the Beauty Bakery Game of Cones Fury of the Oven eyeshadow palette. This is a set of 12 shadows in here. A really cute palette. I haven't seen a lot of people dive into this palette, but I like it. I think it's really cute. It's really fun, and I just recently got this, so I'm still playing around with it, but so far I really do enjoy it. I don't know if you guys heard, but did you guys hear that Urban Decay and the Game of Thrones is going to be coming out with a collection? I'm very excited about that, by the way. I do have 1 palette from Lancome. This here is the Lancome and collab with Proenza. I want to say the last name is Schuler, and this is what it looks like. Here is a palette by Estee Lauder. This is their Goddess Glow palette. Let's dive into the Balm palettes really quick. The very first one I have is the Meet Matchmaker. I do like this palette. The only problem I have with it is I do find that the pan sizes are just slightly small, so it can be a little difficult sometimes to get your brush into the palette. Then we have the Meet Matrimony eyeshadow palette. I picked this up as soon as I found out that they were coming out with it. I absolutely love their palettes like this. If you guys, this is an all matte palette shade. If you guys have not tried anything from the Balm, you have to try their matte eyeshadows. They are phenomenal. And then the other one we have is the Meet Matte Nude palette. Now this palette I have had since I actually started YouTube. It was one of the very first palettes I picked up. So for that reason, I probably won't ever get rid of it. But not only that, I do dive into it. I actually still play with it. I do love it so much, and you guys can see it gets a lot of really good love out of it. And then the last one I have is the Bon Voyage. And the very top 9 shades are eyeshadows, and then you get some blushes. And then the very bottom, you get some lip products. I don't really care for this. The eyeshadows are okay, but again, I kind of stick more towards this part of the palette. So I do have 1 palette from IT Cosmetics. This is the Naturally Pretty palette. We got this in our Ipsy Glam Bag Plus palette. I have not really dove into it a whole lot. This here is a Transforming Pearl. So you can actually wear all of these, which are all matte shades by themselves, or you can use it you can put this on top of it, and then it'll create it into a transforming color, which it'll make it into more of a satin finish. So now we're going to dive into Anastasia palettes. So the very first palette I have from the Anastasia collection is this one right here. I am so terrible, you guys. I don't know what this is called. I want to say it's called the Catwalk palette. The collector in me wanted to have it because it was an Anastasia palette, so it's a really cute palette though. Again, another collector palette in me. This here is the Amrezy collab with them. I actually do play with this palette, if you guys can't tell. I really wish that she would jump back out and they would re-release it, because I'm sure a lot of people would love to have this palette. I do have the ABH Artiste palette, or Artist palette. Again, another palette I don't dive into as much. I do dive into certain colors of this palette. The next palette I have is this one here. I want to say that this is called the Artist Couture palette. This here is the Master palette by Mario. And this is what it looks like. This here is the Modern Renaissance palette. I actually just spoke about this, and I told you guys that this is actually my second palette. That's how much I love this palette. We do have the Sultry palette. If you guys love cool tone colors, you guys would definitely love this palette right here. I absolutely love this palette. It's a newer palette of mine, and I can tell you already, I absolutely love it. We also have the Prism palette. Some of these colors in here I do dive into more so than others. The next one I have is the Norvina palette, and this is what it looks like. I haven't dived into this in a really long time, you guys. I think maybe I'll try to dive into it more in the spring/summer. We have the Subculture palette. This one here is the infamous one from her collection. You can find this now at TJ Maxx. I was actually just there the other day and it was there. The last ABH palette I have is the Soft Glam palette. This one here is another one of my favorite palettes from the ABH line. Then the next thing I have is the KKW and Mario palette. I honestly bought this because I really do like Mario. I think he's so talented and so amazing. So I really wanted to support him. I don't dive into this palette as much as I think I should. Just because I have so many other palettes that have these colors. I mainly bought this to support him, and I should. I mean, I do use it, but I wouldn't say that when I use it, I'm blown away like I am with some of my other palettes, but it's not bad. It's a palette I just forget about. It's simply just on me. It's not anything wrong with the palette. So we're moving into LORAC. The very first one I have is the gold. I believe this is called the gold zipped palette. And this is what it looks like. I absolutely love the LORAC formulas. I find them to be so creamy. And they're one of my favorite formulas, you guys. They just pair so well. I do have the LORAC Pro palette. Now this one I've had for probably a lot longer than I should have, but this is the very first palette I ever bought, you guys. When I started YouTube, I bought this one, and then I bought the one from THEBALM, and that is why I can't put it down. I use this for so many things. If I take this palette with me, I know I can use this for eyeshadow. I actually use the espresso color to set my brows sometimes. So it's just a great all-in-one palette. There's a lot of memories behind this palette, and it reminds me of the very, first couple of videos I did on YouTube, and I was wearing this eyeshadow palette. So for that reason, I probably won't ever get rid of it. And then I have their other LORAC Pro palette. This one is, I believe, number 2. And I bought this one, again, because I loved the LORAC Pro original. So I wanted to get this one. And this one has more of those cooler tone vibes. I do have 2 of the Mega Pro palettes. I have the LORAC Mega Pro first one, I believe, is that they have. And we just talked about this in my Shop My Stash. Really great palettes. It's got a lot of colors. I really wish that they would have created this as part of their permanent collection, but... And then the one I have right now, which is part of my Shop My Stash, is the LORAC Mega Pro 3. Since I pulled it out in my Shop My Stash, I've really been falling in love with it all over again, and I remember now why I bought it. I've been diving more into this top row for everyday colors, and then I do like to mix them up, but just a really great palette. I'm really glad I pulled this out of my Shop My Stash because I've really been loving it. Moving into Pure Cosmetics, we have the Soiree Diaries. This is the very first palette I picked up from Pure Cosmetics. I believe we may have gotten this in a BoxyCharm. This was a really great palette we picked up from BoxyCharm. Another one we got in our BoxyCharm was the Pure Midnight Masquerade. This one here has a combination of 4 face blushes, and then you get 6 eyeshadows. And then we have the BoxyCharm and Pure Cosmetics palette where they collab together to create this one. They did, I want to say that they did like an entire PR stint with this and sent some influencers out. This was an okay palette, not my favorite of all the formulas. I would say if you had to choose between a palette, I would definitely not get this one, and I would go in with the Soiree Diaries. I feel like the formula in this one is way better than this formula. And then I have the Pure and Etienne palette, and I feel like these Pure Cosmetic palettes are hit and miss. This formula I would say is more comparable to the last palette I showed you from their collection. I think that some of the colors in here are a little less pigmented than others, but overall it's a pretty decent palette. So this here is the Life's a Drag palette. This is by Lunar Beauty, which is by Manny MUA. I really like the layout of this palette. I love the packaging of this palette. It's very sturdy. It feels very luxe. I do love that he separated the eyeshadows by neutrals on one side and colorfuls on the other. He just did an incredible job with this palette. I absolutely love it. I do have one Makeup Geek palette. This is called In the Nude. And as you guys can see, it is a little bit smashed. I have not pressed it yet. It has been sitting on my counter to press. I actually just discovered it when I rearranged my eyeshadow palette. So it is something I do have to press. But I like Makeup Geek eyeshadows. I think that they, again, have been pushed under the rug. And I'm really saddened by that because Makeup Geek has an amazing formula. I do love that they are now located in Target. Their formula is fabulous. This here is the Sigma Nightlife palette. This is definitely a palette that you have to build up. The color is there. You just have to kind of work with it. We have the Ace Butte palette, which we got in our BoxyCharm. Another beautiful, very warm tone palette. We do have the Pretty Vulgar Nightingale palette. This one, again, we got in our BoxyCharm. This palette here is by Gorgeous Cosmetics. It is a 8 pan eyeshadow palette. I actually liked doing this because I actually got to pick out the eyeshadows that I wanted in my palette to create. So I really enjoyed this. I do like the pan sizes in here. Let's move into Profusion. We have quite a few Profusion palettes, so I'll dive into them. We've got the Profusion Mixed Metals palette. This is not my favorite palette from them, but I do like the blush. I think it's really pretty and vibrant. I can see myself wearing it more so in the springtime than right now. I don't know if you guys can tell, but in my opinion, it looks very similar to the Naked 2 palette. Then we have the Chocolates palette. This has got more of those chocolates and those green tones to them. Now this here is their Sienna's palette, and if you guys like warm tones, and especially with spring and summer coming, you definitely have to try out these palettes. FYI, these palettes are $10 a piece. Next one we have is the Wonderlust palette. This one's got a little bit more colorful colors to play around with. Now this one here is their Eye and Cheek palette, and the eyeshadows are really great. It's just a really good $10 palette because you get a kind of a nice combo of both. And then the last palette I have in the Profusion line is the Naturals palette. This is another one that I really, really love, you guys. It's a really great palette, really good for everyday work appropriate palette. It's got a lot of light colors, so if you're looking for a really good, affordable, everyday palette with really good color to it, you definitely need to check out their Naturals palette. Moving into Morphe, we have the 15B palette. This here is the Brunch, I believe. They call it the brush. They call this one the Brunch palette, I believe. And this is okay. I don't know what it is, but I feel like some of these smaller palettes, only this one and the other one I'll show you, I feel like the formula is not there. I'm still playing with this to figure it out, but I feel like there's something off with the formula in these palettes. And I don't know if it's when they kind of revamped or whatnot, but let me know down below if you guys are noticing it too. Maybe it's just me or it's my palette. But just here recently with the first two palettes I'll show you guys, I just feel like the formula is a little bit different. Then we have the 15T palette, and this here is the one I was talking about. I don't play around with the cooler tone colors because I find them to be really patchy, so I really stick to more of the orange tone shades, or I'll stick to the bottom green shades. But I just find that the kind of the middle row is really difficult to work with. Obviously like the orange and the brown shade is fine, but some of these are just kind of patchy when you build them. Jaclyn Hill latest collab. The only one I ended up picking up that I actually really kind of enjoyed was the Bling Boss one, I believe is what it's called. I decided to pick this one up only because I have her other palettes and I'd heard really mixed reviews, so I figured if I wasn't going to pick them all up, I decided to pick up the one that I felt I gravitated more towards, so this is the one I went with. So I do have some of their older palettes. I have the 35W palette, which looks like this. I find that these palettes, you know, I've had these palettes for a couple of years now, and they still work. The formula in here is really great. I haven't had any issues with it. I like this palette. This palette's very neutral, but it's got just a little bit of color, so I can add just a little bit of something to my lower lash line, but I like this as an everyday palette. So this one here, I'm really glad I haven't gotten rid of this one because I really love it. It's the original Jaclyn Hill creation that they created together with Morphe, and I still use it. I love it. I think it's a good palette, and the colors are very similar to her other palette that she did just recently, the big white one behind here. But I still dive to this one. I feel like I dive into this one way more than I dive into her big white palette. I do also have the 35C palette. I want to say that they discontinued this, right? And then James Charles came out with his palette, and I don't play around a whole lot with color, but when I do, I pull this out. This here is the 35OS palette, and I like this one when I can't find a good highlight shade or something to really give me a pop on my lid. This is the palette I dive into. And then the last one I have is the Jaclyn Hill and Morphe palette. Moving into Makeup Revolution, I have two palettes. The very first one I have is the Emily Edit palette. This is the Wants palette. I spoke about this one in my Ulta haul update, and I just mentioned to you guys I haven't played around with it enough to know whether or not I love it, so I'm still playing with this one. And then I do have the Naked Chocolate palette. This one is supposed to be a dupe for the Chocolate Bar palette from Too Faced. I don't feel like this is even close to it. I only actually keep this so that I could do like a dupes video. That's why I bought it, so that's why I hold on to it. Moving into Coastal Scents, I do have two revealed palettes. The very first one I have is the original revealed palette, which is, in my opinion, supposed to be similar to the Naked original palette from Urban Decay. Then I have the Revealed 3, which looks like this. It's got a little bit more berry tone to it. Then I have the Fairy Fuchsia palette. And this one here is a little bit more cooler tone. It got more satin and matte finishes to it. Moving into Crown Pro, we have the Glam Metals palette. I like this palette. We got this in a BoxyCharm, and I thought it was a really cute palette. The colors in here are really nice, and I like the formula. And then the other Crown Pro palette we got is from BoxyCharm also. I really like this palette also. I do have one palette from Winky Lux. This here, look at the packaging on this. It's super glittery. I absolutely love that. I don't own anything else from Winky Lux, but I can tell you right now, I was so impressed with this palette. I just loved the way that it blended on my eyes. I like the color selection, and I just really enjoyed it. I do have a few palettes from this brand called Mies. This is actually a brand that is available on Amazon, and I really, really love these palettes. It's got a little bit more vibrant colors in it. A majority of this is going to be a metallic based, but this one is more of the teal one, and this is more of a neutral palette. Again, I really like this formula. And then we have the purple palette. And this one here has got more colors to it, a little bit more vibrant, and this is where I feel like the formula in here really packs a punch. I love to play around with these colors. They're very vibrant. And then the last palette I have from Miskos, which this should probably be in my glitter selection, but this is their pressed glitters. If you guys love glitters, or you guys want something that's a little bit easier to work with, I would definitely recommend it. I love having pressed glitters like this. It's such a great formula, and if you guys like I said, if you like pressed glitters, definitely check out this palette. I want to say this retails for about 19 bucks on Amazon. We have one palette from Flirt Cosmetics. It's the Major Metallics eyeshadow palette. Their brand has been discontinued, so that is why I really don't play with them very much. But yeah, I still have this one. Moving into BH Cosmetics, we have the Wild and Free Baked Eyeshadow Palette. I do dive into this one every so often. I'm not the biggest fan of baked formulas. I find them to be a little bit more difficult personally to work with. So I don't dive into this one as much, but every so often I'll try to incorporate it into my looks. Then I have the Take Me to Brazil palette. This here is their older palette. I do know that they kind of revamped it and brought it back, but I ended up not repurchasing it because I still have this one, and when I go to color, this is one of the staple palettes I like to have in my collection. And then one more from BH Cosmetics that I forgot to add. This one here is the Foil Eyes. This is their 28 color palette. I got this at a Generation Beauty, I believe. And this is all shimmers. This is an all shimmer palette. I have one palette from Becca Cosmetics. This is the Volcano Goddess palette. And this palette, I feel like, just doesn't get enough hype. I really do like the formula in here, and I really like the color selection. Moving into Kevyn Aucoin, I have their Making Faces beauty book. The first one is the contour palette. I like to keep these all together. Their formula is incredible for contouring, so definitely try them out. The next one you have in the booklet is this blush, and then you've got some eyeshadows in it. And then this one right here is strictly eyeshadows. So I have a total of 4 palettes. The other 3 I have sitting in my to be worked on or try out. This is one of them that I've already tried out, and I did an Instagram video using this. This is their Emphasize palettes, which are very new to their collection. So you get a total of 3 matte shades and then 2 metallics, and then it also includes a cream eyeshadow to go along. And then the last palette I have from Kevyn Aucoin is the ElectroPop, which is more of their colorful colors. I have 2 studio makeup palettes. These are on-the-go eyeshadow palettes. This one here is a neutral size palette, and then this one here is a cool tone palette. I do have a palette from Alamar Cosmetics. This is also another one we got from BoxyCharm. I do have the palette from Dominique Cosmetics. This is her Latte palette. I absolutely adore this palette. It's so good, you guys, and I definitely want to pick up the berries and cream one. I just need to go into Ulta and try to find it, but it's a really good palette. I definitely recommend the Dominique Cosmetics line. Moving into Carity Cosmetics, the very first one we have is a Picante palette. Again, a very warm tone palette. And then I have the matte palette, which is 21 colors in here, and I really like this. I've used this so many times here recently to create so many different looks. I've created a very colorful look using this palette. I've created a very neutral, easy brown, smoky eye, halo eye, so many great variations with this palette. And then the last one I have from her collection is the Rosé All Day palette. This one is, in my opinion, kind of more for like the pinker springtime tones. I have this one from, this here is the Sephora and Mickey Mouse collection, or Minnie Mouse, I should say. And once you open it, this is what it looks like. And I will say that the colors in this palette are incredibly gorgeous. I do have this book from Avon. This is the Avon Iconic Avon. This is the Beauty Classic collection. This here was part of their Christmas collection. You've got the Eyes of Golden Wonder, She Dreams of Silver, and In the Dawn. It does come with 3 volumes. This is volume number 1, which is all neutrals. Then you have volume number 2, which is more cool tone, and it's all shimmers. And then the last one you have is their blush palette. I do have this palette by Inglot. This is one of their Z palettes, and then you can just pop in your individual pans. So this is all I have. I just have 5 shadows. I do like Inglot eyeshadows. It's just kind of hard to find, so I only pick up Inglot eyeshadows when I'm back in California, when I visit my mom and my dad, because their Macy's has a Inglot booth in it, so that's the only time I pick up any of their shadows. Moving into Kat Von D, I do have the Kat Von D Shade and Light Eye palette. One of my all-time favorite matte eyeshadow palettes. I absolutely love this. I know a lot of people have been boycotting her brand, but her products are just, in my opinion, they're still really, really great. So I absolutely love this palette. I also do have the Kat Von D Serpentina palette, which looks like this. Got more of those colorful shades in it, and then it does come with a gold loose shadow. And then the last one I have is the Saint and Sinner palette. And then you've got a nice mix of cool tones, you've got colors, you've got mattes, you've got shimmers. It's an all-around really great palette. I still enjoy it, I just don't ever use it on my channel. The next palette I have is my Makeup Forever Z palette. So in here is a combination of MAC, ABH, and Makeup Geek single shadows. And then I also have a couple of ones that we've received in subscription boxes. This one here is my Il Makiage palette. I talked about this before. The formula is really great. I actually really enjoy the colors. My only downside to this palette is that it is a very expensive palette for, in my opinion, the brand. And that is why I don't play around with it a lot on my channel, just because I feel like they need to come down with the price point on these palettes. I have 2 palettes by Lunatic Cosmetics. I don't really know the exact names of this, but this here is the very first palette. And then I have this purple toned palette, and again, another set of colors. These both are pretty light in color, so I wear these more for when I just want something really easy on the eyes. And then this is another palette that I have from Lunatic Cosmetics, and this has 6 shadows. Now we are moving into my drugstore palette. So this here is its own separate drawer, so we'll go ahead and start on the left side. I do have 2 eyeshadow palettes from Pixie Beauty that I just got in the mail. This one here is called Reflex Light. It is all shimmer shadows, which I think are really, really pretty. I'm excited to play with this one. And then this one here is called Natural Beauty, but with more of the cooler tone side. And in this one, you actually get a nice array of mattes and shimmers. This palette here is by Collab. So this one here is by Collab Beauty. I did do a full one brand tutorial using this palette. This is called the Best of Day palette. I love this palette. I think the formula is really great, and I really do like a majority of the products from this brand. Starting with CoverGirl, this one is Posh Chic, and this is from their new Full Spectrum line. Then I have this one, which is more colorful, and this is called Zodiac, again from their Full Spectrum line. I have Reverence, another one from the Full Spectrum line. And then this one here is the last one from the Full Spectrum line, and this is called Gravity. I have 2 palettes from the Katy Kat collection, and this one here is the very first one. And this one here is called Hot Cat. I do love this palette. I actually feel like the metallics in this palette are a little bit better than the mattes in this palette. And then I have Cool Cat. This one here is a bit more colorful, and I do like the shimmers in this palette. I have this one from their True Naked line. This one is the Smoky palette. This one here is really pretty. I do have a few of the Everyday Eye collection from Milani. These are some of my favorite drugstore eyeshadow palettes to go to. I can't say enough good things about this palette. So this one here is called Bare Necessities. Then I have Plum Basics. And this one here is Must Have Naturals. Now we're going to move into Wet n Wild, and Wet n Wild is actually a majority of this collection is Wet n Wild. So let's kick it off. These are the newest ones in my collection. The very first one is from the Rebel Rose collection. I do have a video going up. It's going to be my first impressions using these palettes. So keep a lookout for that. It should be coming up after this video. So this first one is called A Secret Garden Rendezvous. This one here is called A Bed of Roses. And then the top left one is one of my favorite colors so far. It blends out so beautifully on the lid. And then this one here is called House of Thorns, and that green is so beautiful also. Then I have one of their bigger palettes. It's called Nada Basic Peach. I have Rosé in the Air, which is a great dupe for the Anastasia Modern Renaissance palette. Going into some of the smaller quads, we have the Naked Truth, which is a good everyday eyeshadow palette. Then I have this one, which has got more purple tones to it. Another newer one to my collection is called Sweet as Candy. This one here is their limited edition one, and this one here is called Hieroglyphic Heart. And then I have I'm Getting Sunburned. So these here are from the Fergie collection, and if you guys have been a long-time subscriber of mine on my channel, you guys know that the Wet n Wild Fergie collection was one of my favorite collections. So this first one is called Camouflage Couture, and this is more of your green shades. And then I have Maldives Sky. And then the last one I have is Desert Festival. I used to wear this all the time, you guys. And then an oldie but a goodie, we have Comfort Zone. Then I have a few of the Zodiac collection ones. The very first one I have is Air. The only thing I don't like about these is that they aren't separated, so they can get a little difficult to try to pinpoint each color. And we have Water, and those blues there are incredibly gorgeous. And then I have Earth. I want to say that there's one more, but I can't seem to find the other one in my collection. And then the last one from e.l.f. that I have is called Nude Awakening. You guys know I really love this palette. If you have to pick up or you see a palette to try out, definitely try out this one. We're diving into e.l.f. now. So the first one from e.l.f. is the Rose Gold Sunset palette. This one here is really pretty. The formula is good. I wouldn't necessarily say that it's the best formula from e.l.f., but it's a pretty decent palette. Then I have Mad for Matte. This one does run more on the cooler tone side. I do really like this palette. I think the formula is a little bit better in this one than the one that I just showed you guys. And if you guys are looking for a all-over eyeshadow palette, this is a good one. This one here is called Posh Peacock, and this is their chromatic eyeshadow palette. And then I have Bird of Paradise, and this one here is the one that I like a little bit better. We will move into Maybelline. I have just 2 eyeshadows from Maybelline. I have this one right here. I used to have another one from Maybelline, which was my all-time favorite eyeshadow palette. I don't remember if they still make it. Every time I've gone back to the store to check for it, I haven't seen it, but it came in a quad like this. And then the last palette I have from Maybelline is the Nudes palette, which I remember when this palette came out, there was so much hype around it and so many people were excited about it. Funny enough, I have this one from ColorMates. This is one that I got in my Dollar Tree haul and my one brand tutorial that I did using Dollar Tree makeup. And Funny enough, you guys, I actually love this palette for this white shade. I feel like that one is such a beautiful like snow, really bright white snow color, so I actually keep it for that. I have one palette from Rimmel called Dark Signature. You guys can see my love for purple. I had to pick this one up. This one here is by Blink, and this one is in collaboration with BoxyCharm. This came in our BoxyCharm box, and I do like the shimmers in here. They're very vibrant and very pigmented. We have a trio by IBY Beauty. I want to say that we got this in an Ipsy box. This one here is by Naked Cosmetics. I'm not really sure which box we got this in, but I know for a fact that I got this in a box, and I do like the colors. I thought they were really different, and I like that. I have two palettes by Catrice Cosmetics. I have the Essential Nude Eyeshadow Palette Collection. And then this one here is the Precious Copper collection. I have this one by Pop Beauty. This is called Blink Brilliance. So it's got a couple of matte shades on one side, and then you get some pressed glitters. This here is by Joa Beauty. This is their eyeshadow palette collection. I did another one brand tutorial using this one as well, and I really do like this brand. I love their foundation. You guys know, if you guys have been around my channel for a bit, if you've been on my channel for a couple of videos, you guys will know that the Truly Yours foundation is an all-time favorite of mine. Joa Beauty is at CVS. If you guys have not tried their brand, I definitely recommend it. They are incredible. And then I have two quads from L'Oreal. I bought these in order to do my one brand L'Oreal tutorial. And then the very last product I have is my Violet Voss HG Fun Sized palette, you guys. I mentioned this in one of my favorites videos that we got this in our Ipsy Glam Bag Plus. Love this palette. I definitely want to pick up more Violet Voss eyeshadows. They are incredible. I feel like I've been missing out, and I know I have. So that is the last one in my collection. This probably should have been more with my higher end palettes, but okay. So that there is my eyeshadow palette collection. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I do plan to do probably a eyeshadow palette declutter here in probably June or July. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Make sure to give it a thumbs up. If you guys want to see a blush collection / declutter, that is what is coming up next. So make sure to be subscribed if you guys are new so you guys don't miss out on videos. And if you guys are already a part of my channel, thank you so much for watching. Make sure to hit that notification bell. That way, anytime I upload, which is on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Sundays at 6 p.m., you guys get that little ding on your phone, and it lets you guys know that I've uploaded a video. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you guys have a wonderful evening, and I will see you guys all in my next video. Bye.